Hello and most welcome to 1052 here, and I will continue to make parallels with love or knowledge and what we read before. Is this cross hatching that is so fruitful and dearly recommended by both Derrida and Heidegger, and I feel it makes it possible to be both specific and general, something that would be inaccessible in beings, but quite possible in being. And a little hint here, using a vocabulary that is not allowed in Heidegger, you could say that beings are not of lower value than being, but there are more options in being, and being will still have beings, so you still will be in beings, but you'll have a heck of a lot more options within the beings, and you will even have the sort of option of choosing beings, but choosing is not the right, but your projecting will be your own, and therefore it will have the character of individuality, subjectivity, and that equals more shared experience. Yes, Heidegger is that different. The more subject, now I'm really getting into a sketchy view here, and do put this in parenthesis, but in this other metaphysical view, the more subjective you become in this certain way, you become more accessible to others, and you also become true in a way that is not based on comparison. How odd that even may sound in this day and age where all views, all opinions, religion even, I would say religion is definitely not an exception, and everything is, so to speak, shifting under our feet, and everything is shifting at the same time. It's very hard to perceive that anything is shifting. It's very close to being on a boat for an extended period of time. In the end, you will not actually feel the boat moving. You become accustomed. This is actually true. Doesn't matter if it moves for 1 day, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If asked, you won't even notice it's moving. We become habituated. And if everything is going in the same flow, you will confuse beings with being. Yes, the last thing I actually will stand for. What Heidegger points to is a confusion with beings. Either way, it's a confusion. But nothing excluded from this change. And nothing of this change is happening in the East. So in the West, everything is under that movement. In the East, nothing. Maybe on the surface in some other nations, but that's very superficial. Take, for instance, the statistics of divorce in Japan. It's 0.87%. Modernity, in how we think it, is a Western thing. And I wouldn't say Western construct. It's something that is here. It is experiential, it's real, it's not a construct, but it's here. So Heidegger is fantastic. There are more options in Heidegger, and you will always gain with Heidegger. There is no loss somewhere. You don't have to give something up. It's not like entering membership in AA or Weight Watchers. I think Weight Watchers could be something for me. And then, of course, you have to give up the salami I ate yesterday. Heidegger will make you incredibly more effective and will make you a sharp intellectual in whatever area you choose to enter. Doesn't really matter, because those are all areas of being. And it's the same as once you get into Heidegger, once you can ask the why question, you will be feeling that you former sat in a wheelchair doing a boxing round, and then you had legs. Nothing is lost there. Every loss would be an absurdity. It's all gain and it's all good. Compared to the limitation, have you stopped beating your wife? The limitation is not in the question, the limitation is in the contradiction or the polarity. And it puts you on the spot. And it's not so by not answering the question. That's bad. And Heidegger and deconstruction is getting out of that limitation. And what would be the loss of that? You will be on gain. You can answer the question truthfully, you can't otherwise. I think that is the furthest gain. And you will also probably to 99% escape the dilemma of indicating that you hit somebody. Well, we continue here. Underlying understanding, page 136, 16th chapter, if I count it correctly. Underlying understanding, concepts fundamental to themselves, built on space-time and knowledge, building space-time and knowledge, naming, proclaiming, more than names, less than name, meets the eye. And I like that last one, meets the eye. It could be I as in I, could also be I as in I, me. Interpretation at the core. To investigate why we follow models, the models themselves, including models for how to investigate, must be put aside as far as possible. I like this project, I can't say anything else. Unless we turn directly to experience, we will continue to play a model off against another, trading in old belief structures for new ones. If we have no model for how to investigate without applying models for investigation, this is probably all to the good. Conventional understanding asserts that a model, which might be expressed in the form of a statement, interpretation, theory, or story, is true when it offers knowledge of the facts or what really is so. But this model of the truth is not easily maintained, for it seems that facts are nowhere to be found. In trying to contact an objective world, we make use of a model and its constructs to do so. The world that we are accustomed to, even in its most direct and immediate manifestations, is an intricate and overlapping complex of models, built upon interpretations, presuppositions, concepts, meanings, values, and memories. Such constructs can be seen in operation in the shifting views of physical reality through history. Earlier cultures generally accepted earth, air, fire, and water as basic qualities of all that was physically real. A similar model was accepted by the Greeks and was followed by Western culture until a few centuries ago. The picture offered more than just a theory. It described the way that reality was actually experienced. After the discovery of oxygen in the 18th century, modern science embarked on a course that led it to reject this view. The old elements were set aside as faulty interpretations of reality. A new set of elements more directly tied to the idea of substance, was put in that place. However, the new model continued to accept the model of a physical world out there, built up out of fundamental elements that existed independent of human knowledge concerning them. In this century, that model has changed once again. Elemental atoms were found to be composed of more fundamental particles, and these in turn were interpreted as fluctuations of energy or fields, or even as probabilities. It was also suggested for the first time that the exact nature of these particles might depend on how they were observed, thus linking knower and known in a way that goes against the grain of everyday understanding and the structures of temporal knowledge. Through all these changes, however, scientists have continued to uphold the basic model that our interpretations apply to an underlying reality. Thus, the physical sciences go to great lengths to eliminate from their data subjective elements such as bias, faulty perception, or interpretive structures that might come between the observer and the hard data that represents reality. It does not seem that this attempt can be successful. The drive for objectivity still depends utterly on a model that gives meaning to such concepts as object, measurement, and replication, and on the collective understanding embodied in our models of science, scientists, and valid means for knowledge. When the facts of human experience are conditioned by such subjective elements, how can they be objectively true? Next chapter. An underlying reality. Philosophers and students of knowledge have long been aware of such difficulties. Despite their persistent questions, however, common sense continued to maintain that a reality more fundamental than models, constructs, and interpretations does exist. Some philosophers have sided with common sense, and the resulting debate has continued for millennia without resolution. Let us explore this debate briefly, without trying to make any definitive contribution, in order to see the limits within which descriptive knowledge operates. The most convincing evidence that models correspond to an underlying reality appears to be pragmatic. Some interpretive structures work while others do not. Therefore, some interpretations are true, others false. Truth in this sense is understood to mean correspondence with actual facts. For example, if a hungry man imagines that he sees food before him and tries to eat it, he will not satisfy his hunger, even if he is so deluded that he imagines in perfect detail the sensations of smelling, tasting, chewing, and swallowing. He will receive no actual nourishment. If he persists in eating such meals, he will soon starve to death. This example seems to demonstrate what we already understand to be the case, that it would be foolish to deny the distinction between true and false as working principle. But it's quite another matter to conclude that true statements, or for that matter true perceptions, are true insofar as they correspond to an independent reality. Without disputing the trustworthiness of the facts that we rely in our conduct, we can acknowledge that understanding of those facts as existing independently of our interpretations is itself an interpretation of what it means to label a statement as true. Applying a pragmatic test to see whether a statement matches the facts simply means looking to see whether one set of interpretation corresponds to another one. If we take the view that facts are real, we only shift the interpretive dimension to the issue what is real. A novelist who gives his hero blue eyes in chapter 1 cannot give him brown eyes in chapter 5. Does this mean that the hero's eyes are really blue? Within the reality of the novel, the answer is yes. But if we apply the quite different standards of conventional reality, we can only say that the hero himself is fictional, and that it makes no sense to speak of the real color of his eyes. How great! When the underlying reality itself is itself a construct, it seems that we can never move beyond the descriptive realm of models and interpretation. Perhaps our interpretations can be more fully worked out, refined, so that they guide our actions more effectively. Perhaps they can integrate other interpretive structures, so that they become more comprehensive and thus more accurate. But they cannot point to anything beyond or under interpretive structures. When one construct matches another, does this prove that either is real? Suppose that what we understood to be fundamental elements of experience were simply interpretive projections onto a random matrix, which meanings, actions, and results all expressions of the original act of a projection. If this act of projection were fundamental, would our experience necessarily differ in any way from what is right now? Question mark. Next paragraph. Only interpretations. Language, concept, and reason arguments can all be understood as sets of interpretive structures, pointing only to more such structures. But if this is so, what solid foundation is there for knowledge? When we have an experience within time, who has the experience and where? Does the mind receive the content of knowing or create it? When we ask ourselves a question, is the answer an echo of that question? If there is confusion, who is confused? From where would clarity come, and how would it be communicated? By what measure will we know there has been real understanding? When we ask whether the domain of meanings and meaningful distinction is meaningful, we receive an answer in the terms that language makes available to us. What significance attaches to such linguistic constructs? The speaker finds meaning in each word, but a foreigner may hear every word as meaningless noise. Which understanding is really true? How could the speaker convince the foreigner that his words has meaning? Language is a complex self-referring system, a highly structured game, but can it be said to have any objective significance? Experience testifies to what can be achieved through communication based on agreement that words refer to specified subjects of discourse. Yet, achievement and communication are themselves concepts. If they were unavailable, there could be no meaningful distinction between a random motion of the hand and the skillful action that helped to construct a bridge, organize a meeting, or shape a sculpture. Could a foreigner who considers such distinction meaningless be shown to be mistaken? Suppose you dream you are dreaming. Within the dream, there would be no way to determine what was dream and what was reality. If you wake up, this awakening might still be part of the dream, within the dream. Or it might be waking up into the dream. Finally, it might be a real awakening. How could you tell? The witness, next paragraph. Firmly trapped within interpretation, we face a fundamental not knowing that defies penetration. Analysis and questioning themselves arise within interpretive structures. So how can they illuminate those structures? How can we counter a not knowing that throws into doubt each and every interpretive structure? From within conventional experience, only one answer seems possible. Turning from logic and reasoning, we can point to an ever-present witness, the feeling of reality or the conviction that this is so, wholly apart from subtle philosophical investigations. It is this feeling we rely on in conducting the business of our lives. Thus, the difference between waking up into a dream and waking up into reality is ultimately a matter of feeling tone and conviction. We simply know what it is like to experience the real. How very true, I might add. Imagine observing a cup on the table before you. Next, imagine that you have closed your eyes and are imagining the same cup as vividly as you can. There remains a difference in quality between these two experiences, difference in projection and mood. My opinion. This quality is the ultimate guarantor or witness of the real. What we perceive in the imagination lacks this quality, and that is why we consider it unreal. What we dream appears to possess this quality, but when we awaken from the dream, we realize that the witness was only a dream witness. If the witness deceives us so that we assert the reality of what is unreal, we speak of delusion, hallucination, and even psychosis. Such a description can be applied only from the outside. Within the experience, the testimony of the witness is conclusive. We may disregard what the witness tells us because it conflicts with our beliefs or with conventional definition of valid experience. Even so, we are applying external criteria to dismiss what we would otherwise know to be true. In determining what is true about the truth, the witness is more powerful than the content of what is witnessed. Philosophers of several traditions have noted that the content of our experience might be doubted at the deepest level, but that the sense of I am experience seems somehow beyond doubt. Reflection on the nature of the witness thus seems to lead in the end to the sense of self. It is the self, impelled by its own needs and intentions, that unites the momentary observations of the perceiver into a coherent world. This coherence is inseparable from the ineffable but seemingly undeniable quality of the real. Temporal knowledge proclaims itself true, precisely because it is knowledge acquired by a self. The self stands squarely at the center of experience, the knower and the doer, the measure of all things. Because the self exists, the world is real. To continue our inquiry into temporal knowledge, the self and the patterns of intentionality out of which the self emerges must come under investigation. But when we turn to initiate this inquiry, we find that the structures of space and time implicit in our investigation until now undergo a sharp and sudden shift. It is almost as though we are entering a different world. Chapter 17. Models based on constructs, basic model of an underlying reality, pragmatic argument for reality based on constructs, language as self-referring, relying on the witness, self as guarantor of the real. And this is of course the projective power that we possess, that is part and parcel of reality. And passive and active are moods. Moods. So active is more and passive is less, one could say, but they are still modes of the sort of same reality. What other term you can say? And this is absolutely necessary to understand to reach into Heidegger. And that are the moods of oneself and of the world at the very same time. Different mood, different world and self always come together because they constitute complementarity. That doesn't mean that 1 + 1 makes 2. Those conclusions are preemptive or too sharp. You'd be well advised to wait with those conclusions. Our projecting is the modus, one could speak, like a more intense projecting makes another result. Just to begin, sorry. It has to do with awareness as well. When you project, you receive more, and that is fair to say that is more awareness, that is more nowness, more being here in this very world, being in beings together with beings. Yes, that's what I was saying. Field of awareness, that's the exercise. Investigate the background aspects of feelings linked more to mood or attitude than specific content. He's pointing to that the mood is more important. The mood is the why. Start with that, and then the content could be answered. But we usually, after the metaphysics of presence, we start with the content. And then we both lose the why and the content. It's a severe limitation. Same goes for time as knowledge and space. If we start with spatiality, we start with the XYZ, we are lost. We must start with the why. We must put our foot down and make a stand. We stand for this. This is what I believe in. That's for knowledge. This is where I'm situated. That is for space being balanced. I am here. I'm situated here. Do repeat that almost like a mantra, but when you do it, do believe it as well. Don't let it be a weak belief. And you will notice that there is an incredible difference between the weaker belief and the stronger. And there lies the intellectual life, the life of analysis, there lies all the treasures of the world. But go for the content and get stuck in that content and sort of shape and frame everything to that content, so it becomes less and less for every time, because you don't actively project. A belief or an ideology, a faith, that can be made active. It can also be passive, but it can be made active. But the passive technological way of understanding is always passive. And I think that is a quality difference. So what he's pointing to is a difference in mood, not the content, not the result, not the subject in front of object in space and so forth. That is a limitation. Investigate field of awareness, the name of exercise 17. Investigate the background aspect of feelings linked more to mood or attitude than specific content. How do feelings relate to awareness as the field for thought? Conduct this investigation both in the morning and in the evening. Noticing the differences, continue with the practice even if you're not sure what you're looking for. Very important. Continued practice can contact the intuitive internal mind, bringing greater clarity and calm. Self-center, witness persistence, persisting, presenting past, present and future, here, now, here, emergent, dispensation of the known, will to be toward what will be. The world of the self. I just have to note here, finally, thanks to Heidegger and Derrida, deconstruction has helped me to reach the level of being able to read things that are expressed in this way, with self and ego and all things. Too much of metaphysics of presence formerly affected me. I heard these reasons or similar formulations with I, egoless world and all that, D.T. Suzuki, and especially that American beatnik professor or philosopher, what's his name, had destroyed my understanding of these things because they did not understand themselves. So it's always a problem with taking second-hand material, as I did, but since I wouldn't be able to read in the original language and my understanding would be blocked out, I don't see there was a mistake made on either part. It is inevitable. The self as understood by conventional knowledge exists and acts across time. If we analyze this understanding, which in itself belongs to the self, it appears that the self establishes itself and the world that it knows by moving off center, beyond the point instant of temporal knowledge. In one unified action, it takes a position, posits a situation, and imposes meaning. The self finds itself in the world. Its attention defines here and then, there and then, and its vantage points locates here and now. Form and feeling, specific characteristics and qualities, knowing and being, and the entire realm of human values and meanings all arise as direct consequence of the self's positionings. In taking a position, the self remains bound by all the polarities of conventional observation. Without the structure of perceiver and perceived, the self would be powerless to make knowledge his own. But while the self assumes the role of the perceiver, dwelling there, here and now, it also views itself as persisting over time, uniting the successions of nows and able to move freely from here to there. The difficulties that led us to wonder in an early chapter how moments of time could possibly be linked are of no concern to the self, which knows that it has capacity to establish the link. The self traversing time, continuity over time, is the hallmark of the self's identity. Although always present, for only in the present can the self act, experience and know. The self exists in the present by drawing on the past and shaping it into the future. Without a continuing relation to the past, the present self would just vanish, to be replaced in the next moment by something completely different. Without a transitional relation to the future, the present self would endure forever, like a woman who was always pregnant. Neither possibility truly allows for self to exist. Unlike the perceiving subject, the self is a historical being, somehow extensively situated within the flow of linear time, subordinating the perceiver's isolation in the here and now to its own claim to be the owner of its experience. The self asserts that it wills the successive acts of temporal knowing that give rise to the structures of its known world. The persistence of the self over time might seem to parallel the persistence of what the self knows through descriptive knowledge, but there is an important difference. While the self's known world is salvaged from the past, the self that knows emerges from the future. For the self constructs its being through its desire and wants, and desire and want though their contents are drawn from the past, are based in what has not yet to come to be. The self's fundamental desire is the desire to know and establish a world into which the self can emerge, like the bird phoenix. Responding to this desire, the self appropriates the past through descriptive knowledge, structuring a present reality in which his own existence as knower of the known and meaning giver is assured. But desire takes more complex forms as well. In contrast to the pale and often disappointing world accessible to descriptive knowing, desire manifests an endless variety of moods and atmospheres, holding out the promise of infinite possibilities. In terms of content, the future seems likely to offer only variations on the rigid world of past definitions and structures. But on a deeper level, the future offers the momentum of an indeterminate beginning, allied with possibilities that fuel hope, fear, and longing. Led by such emotions and expectations, the self lives toward the future. Its actions now are governed by a concern for the future's then. Intent on what might be, but is not yet, it shifts from mood to mood, reinterpreting the past, reassessing the present, responding more or less consciously to the rhythms of wanting. The self wants to become a certain way or attain a certain state. It wants to be happy, to be in possession of something, to be finished, or simply to endure. Cravings, wishes, and hopes induce a self-propelled acceleration that draws the self forward. This is the propelling action, I might add. The force of the self's desire unfolds as the momentum of linear time. The knowing self in time and space. We can now see in a preliminary way the nature of space, time and knowledge in the world that the self occupies and structures. First, whereas space is central to the world of objects, time is central to the world of the self. The time that unfolds with a dynamic momentum from past to present to future is the domain of the self. Whereas objects occupy space, the self experience and owns time. Space is likewise no longer an empty container for things. It is too has become personalized as the expanse separating the self from what is desired. The self here is no longer the isolated point occupied by the perceiver, engaged in polar knowing, but rather a specific position adopted by the self and maintained as separate from the object of desire, which is positioned there. A structure of desire here and there cut across the distinction of object-centered space and time, for separation can be understood equally well in terms of space or time. Finally, the knowledge particular to the world of the self is what might be called intentional knowledge. That is, knowledge that arises with regard to the future, as the self determines its goals and decides what it intends to accomplish by its activity. Through intentional knowledge, the self shapes its being over time, choosing a course of conduct and a way of life, and defining itself and its word. The dynamic future-centered interplay of space, time and knowledge in the world of the self thus differs in fundamental ways from the interaction of object-centered space and time and the corresponding past-centered descriptive knowledge. However, this is not the only way of looking at the self. It is one of the puzzling facts about the self that it also has an object-like existence. Through its body, the self interacts with other objects in ways that seem better described by the space, time and knowledge of a space-centered objective reality. We shall return to consideration of this dual citizenship of the self below. The availability of two ways of understanding space, time and knowledge may help explain why the critiques of polar knowledge carried out in early chapters do not in themselves seem convincing. I have to agree. Though the logic of polar knowledge cannot account for how anything is ever known, the self insists that it knows nonetheless. Even the failure of descriptive knowledge to establish the truth of any position, which relates more directly to the temporal knowing of the self, leaves intentional knowledge unaffected. In terms of the different space and time and knowledge within which the self appears to operate, and such difficulties play no role. What is the relation between space, time and knowledge of the space-centered object realm and the corresponding factors in the world of the self? An answer that drew on conventional understanding might suggest that the intentional structures that accord with the self's way of being are only interpretive overlays on the more fundamental realities of the object realm. But even if this suggestion could succeed in reducing the unique attributes of the knowing self to manifestations of object-centered reality, which does not appear likely, we have already found it ineffective to label one view of reality as real while dismissing the other as interpretation. The distinction between reality and interpretation is itself an interpretation. The inevitability of interpretive structures, understood as the outcome of an activity by itself, does not mean that the self-centered interpretation of space, time and knowledge is the real one. This conclusion attempts to escape the all interpretations view by positing interpretations as reality underlying interpretation. I think that's a very good point, otherwise you get stuck in this dismissing of interpretation without understanding them. But even this reality can only be established on the basis of an interpretation. A final alternative, that the different space, time and knowledge enjoyed by the self are independent of the object-centered space, time and knowledge, also raises major difficulties. How could the two kinds of space and time be brought into contact? What would this require the third kind of time or space that encompass both of the other kinds? To study these questions, the structures of intentional knowledge and the patterns that establish the self need clarification. Only then can we investigate with sufficient care the dimension of space, time and knowledge that the self-centered view begins to open. Well, this is obviously the Heideggerian object in front of space, the subject in front of space with an object in it. This is a non-existent space, a vacuum space, where everything is situated and there is a sort of static subject looking at the object. And nothing happens in this moment and nothing is gained. This is pure passivity. And this passivity then goes over in the overextended conquering or grasping of reality. This not allowing things to become by themselves. Instead, it's an egoistic, preemptive, almost starving creature who grasps for the objects, need them, collects them, but don't put any real interest into them. Like a mad shopper in a shopping center, buying everything he sees without ever enjoying anything. Being as far from a materialist he can ever be, just by not really enjoying them. And once we don't enjoy materiality, the matters of things, we don't enjoy spirituality, because they are all how we treat space. Remember what I said in the beginning of the previous lecture, that topology is everywhere. It is not a mathematical subject. We all use that when we talk, speak and think, something that Barbara Tversky, the wife of Amos Tversky, showed so clearly, that thinking and being intellectual come from space. Shutting that understanding out make intellectualizations into something much less, something less encompassing, something less functioning, something very superficial. And then you become this John Myrdal, having a library of 40,000-50,000 books and a shell of understanding of everything. A shell of understanding that makes him a dollar magnifying glass. Because the modern knowledge that we experience the last 50 or maybe 80 years neglects the subject even more. The death of the subject meant a revival of the subject in a more caustic and hardened way. And I think that is particularly apparent in the science of literature. The death of the subject there become even more tendency to subjectification. And of course, what you really do if you put everything this into space in front of a subject and object, I leave everything to chance. I have no control anymore because I don't project. And in the end, emotional randomness will sort of decide the picture, will be the underlying picture, and that picture, I'm afraid, will be fear and nothing else. Because we have the last 70, 80 years established a fear-related knowledge. Remember so closely my old professor in language who threatened everyone who didn't agree with him. He wanted to put the devil into them, the fear of the devil. He wanted to command them. There was lacking knowledge, there is no other way. And I would say also the democracy that were in the other institutions had the same reason. Because there is no need to respect or listen to a professor if he doesn't have knowledge. There is more something you discuss and something you develop at that place, not reaching out into otherness, not reaching out into the world. You will be trapped by the model, and it would be a superficial take on reality, no deepening, and the death of the intellectual mind, or the closing of the Western mind, as somebody so elegantly put it, which I think this is caused by this. And also, it is the pharmacon for this. You might call it poison if you're coming from the first level, but if you are in the second level, it will be medicine. So, poison for some, and definitely medicine for others. This is what moods introduce. This is why moods are so important to understand in Heidegger. The mood decide the truth of Sein und Zeit. Your mood is an special character. There won't be any truth to Sein und Zeit. Nothing. That cannot translate you haven't understood it. No, there is no truth then, because the subject is in on it. The magnifying glass is in on it. The binocular is in on it. You are the binocular. If you arrange in a special manner, an outcome of truth won't be. That doesn't mean you haven't understood. You can repeat every word, just like Jan Myrdal. He can repeat and refer to every single page of what he knows. So memory has, but it needs to be supplemented in a true way with other things to be truly having a good foundation for a growth in depth. Okay, it was a pleasure, and I say thank you very much and have a very nice afternoon. Bye bye for now. And with a view.